Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Igor Ljuboncic. I'm a developer advocate at Canonical. I think this is my first in-person conference since, well, last 2.5 years, I guess. Hopefully you'll enjoy today's session. Those of you who know me, I tend to use chocolate or candy as an incentive for people to ask questions, and then I used to toss them at pretty high velocity across the room. But because we're still a bit on a high level of sensitivity due to hygiene, I'm not going to do that today, so you will have to, no, I'm sorry, Alesh, you'll have to ask questions and get nothing in return except maybe an answer. Okay. So I'm going to talk to you about Snapcraft Secrets, the hidden power of desktop extensions. Okay, a little bit about myself. As I mentioned, I work at Canonical. I'm a developer advocate, and Linux is my hobby and passion. It's been for almost 20 years now. I also happen to be a physicist who writes books, and to de-stress, I go on a racetrack and drive really, really fast, if I can. Well, doesn't really matter. It's all about technique, precision, and accuracy. Speed comes with it naturally. Anyway, that was a question, what car, if you didn't hear it online. So let us talk then about Snapcraft and making snaps. Ideally, this would be a very easy, almost a trivial task. But we all know that in reality, it usually isn't like that. It takes a bit of effort, takes a bit of time, you have to understand the syntax, you have to understand the finer details of getting complicated applications created as snaps. And you have to take into account quite a few parameters and variables. You have to think about, okay, this is a standalone application that lives inside an isolated, well, it's not a container, but an isolated container-like entity, and it has to communicate with an outside world. So what do? How do we plug through the security layer and allow functionality that users expect? Then we have things like, is my application going to get outdated at some point? What about theming? What about consistency? How does it live and integrate with the desktop? There are quite a few questions here, and they're not trivial to solve. But my question is then, what if there was a magical way to make snaps easier to snap? If you have any questions, as I mentioned earlier, you don't have to wait for the end of this session. Just raise your hand throughout, and I'll be more than happy to pause and answer your question. In fact, you should. Just think of that chocolate you're not getting. And yeah. Any questions? Anyone wants to share a hard snapping experience that today will be resolved? Britt, yes? We need a mic, so we're going to wait a sec for the question to be asked. Yes?
This is part question, part just anecdote.
Okay.
When I was in grad school, I tried to snap all of MATLAB. But if you don't know anything about MATLAB, it can be 20, 30 gigabytes. So I tried to create a 30 gigabyte snap. And I was readily crashing the computer, maxing out memory. I couldn't really get it to work. It's probably unusual to have a snap that big. What advice would you give somebody like me who's trying to create just a snap version for portability's sake of such a large behemoth of an application?
Okay. So the answer to that question is twofold. One, there's no easy answer that I can answer today in this session, as we would digress too much from the topic. However, the second answer will come in about 40 minutes, and that's going to be to the presentation on gaming on Linux, which a colleague of mine will mention later, Heather. She will talk about mechanisms, how to create an experience where difficult package manager-like things can live happily as a snap. So there is an easier way to actually put snaps, to create snaps in an automagical way. And it's Snapcraft Extensions. The concept is as follows. You have a lot of repeatable, reusable tasks and code snippets that you put into snaps. For those of you who have created snaps, you go through almost like a recipe. You have to declare what the application does, the security confinement, theming, plugins, and so forth. These steps differ from an application to an application. However, the basic logic is similar. So the idea behind extensions is to actually capture the repeatable elements, put them into a common component, then you can use and reuse in your snaps. And the idea here is then, okay, developers then don't need to really think about system integration because there is a reusable component that they can use. I mean, you have a GNOME desktop, you have a KDE desktop, you have other desktops. Those entities don't change. So if we create an interface that allows a snap to communicate in a nice and elegant way with these 3, 4, 5, 7 desktops, we've done the task, and then someone else can take this code and use it in their snap without having to be an expert in GNOME or KDE. Another thing is security confinement. So we want to have rules that allow our applications to talk to the outside world. So there's a desktop, there's network, home, and so forth. Again, those things won't change. There's not going to be some crazy new functionality out there suddenly. So we can have a repeatable set of instructions, security rules that we can implement, allow people to actually use their snaps in a quick way. What this does is simplify your work, reduce frustration, reduce errors that stem from inconsistency in how applications are being snapped, and offloads a great chunk of non-application specific work that is part of your passion and your work and your hobby to someone else. So basically, you enjoy the fruit of someone else's labor, winning. Any questions, by the way, so far? Objections? No? When I have chocolate, there are more questions. So, there are about, I think, 7 or 8 supported extensions at the moment. You can check them out, this URL here. There are per version GNOME extensions, like 328, 334, 338, and so forth. There's the KDE Neon extension. Those two are very desktop specific. There's an extension for robotics, and more recently for the Flutter framework. These extensions allow you to reuse common components that would be most suitable for the applications most suited for these kind of usages. So if you're creating KDE applications, you want the KDE extension. If you're using GDK/GNOME applications, you want the GNOME one. Or you just want something that integrates well into the desktop. Again, a choice, and so forth. And how this looks like is quite simple. Here's a piece of a code from a YAML, one of the KDE ones, kcalc to be more precise. And I hate saying this, but all you need to do is specify just one liner, well, 2-liner here, but it's extensions, and then specify the extension you want to use. Similarly, if you want to use a GNOME extension, then again, this is a 1-liner, extensions, GNOME 334. Job done. Session over, you're free to go. So, any questions so far? I mean, this looks too simple to be true, right?
There's a question over here.
Yes, please.
Quick question: Can a given snap depend on more than one extension, or is it just a single?
Well, I can think of yeah, well, why not? I mean, maybe you wouldn't mix libraries of the same framework, different libraries from different versions, but I don't think there should be well, we can ask the expert. Alesh and Neil, if you're here, can you think of an application that would use KDE and Qt and GNOME GTK libraries at the same time? KDE and Live. So there's an example. You can use 2 extensions at the same time, double winning. Any other questions? Okay. So we know the magic, but then half of the magic, no, 3/4 of the magic is knowing what's behind the trick. And you can actually see exactly what an extension does by expanding it. And you do this through the command called expand extensions. So basically on the command line, you run Snapcraft expand extensions in the project folder where your snapcraft.yaml file lives. What this will do is print on the command line output an expanded version of your YAML. So you can just pipe it into a file, and then you can do an actual side-by-side comparison between an extension Snapcraft YAML and expanded extension YAML. And I've taken a screenshot here of an example that shows what it looks like. And this is a Firefox YAML. I mean, you do need to have some understanding of the syntax to follow what's happening here. That can't be avoided. There are only so many shortcuts we can take on this journey. The other thing is you also have to be familiar with how to diff files and understand what happens on the left side and the right side. But you can see that there are declarations in the expanded YAML that don't exist in the non-expanded one, in the one that uses the extension. And all these declarations have been predefined by canonical developers, community people, and others who have contributed to these extensions. So they've done a lot of work. For instance, at the bottom corner of the screen, we have the desktop integration, we have GTK themes, we have icon themes, we have sound themes. None of the stuff that are necessarily specific to your application, but are critical to a good user experience. Questions for now? I mean, do I really have to go and buy chocolate now? Okay, Alesh, just for you. Okay. The other benefit of using extensions is someone else is responsible for a big chunk of code that you're going to be using. So if there are changes required to these frameworks, you don't have to worry about it. If there's a new version of GTK, there's going to be a new version of the GNOME extension. Someone is going to do the hard work for you. If KDE folks want to add a bunch of stuff that is common or communal across their application set, they will do it. They will extend their extension. And again, you transparently benefit from these changes without having to worry about them. A new library, maybe even a better way of doing things, a new environment variable, something. And the beauty of this is then you can focus on your passion, you can focus on your work, and I see a hand being raised for a question.
Question over here.
Yes.
So I'm looking particularly at the GNOME extensions, which are versioned.
Yes.
How does the automatic benefit for improvements in the extension translate to versioned extensions?
There were too many instances of version being used in that question for me to reliably answer it. Can you repeat it?
Does the GNOME 334 extension ever update?
Yes, if there are updates that are specific to the libraries and elements to that extension. However, you will not necessarily get libadwaita 4 in that extension because that doesn't make any sense.
Okay, thanks.
If I have some canonical folks here who work on GNOME and they want to help, they can provide additional feedback on what they did. Heather.
Yeah, we do have a mechanism that identifies the libraries that are packaged, and if there's been like a CVE that's been updated and fixed, then we get let know that, hey, we need to rebuild that package to get the CVE fix. But we try really hard to not bump versions of like packages that we're building in parts in those individual extensions to keep it as consistent of an experience, And then that's what. Yeah, so if you need like a newer GTK4, then we say, okay, well then you're gonna have to go wait for the next extension.
So these extensions get packaged into a single snap, or are they separately installed? Like, can I update the extensions individually when there's a CVE, or do I need to rebuild all the snaps that use them?
They are part of, that's a good question. Do you need to rebuild your snap? Maybe. The answer is maybe. If you rely on assets that live in content snaps outside of your snap, then you don't. If however, there are changes that have to be applied to your application, then you have to rebuild it, right? But for instance, the themes and the icons and sounds, once declared, they're what they are. And if there's an update in those elements, they will be updated to their own content snaps. And if your snap is connected to those assets, it will use the new ones. For everyone's sake, so they can hear the question, if you can repeat that with the mic. So
content snaps get distributed separately, and there's a dependency mechanism to...
Yes, so this is maybe an important concept to add a bit more information. So I'll actually use the KDE example, right? lots of KDE apps use lots of similar libraries. So you could have something like 70, 80 Qt libraries, libqt something, being utilized by a single application, and then another, and another, and another. And when you have 150 of those, repetition can get a bit tedious. What you can do is bundle all these into a set, call it a content snap. You can version it to a specific Qt version, to a specific KDE version, however it's required. And then your snap can be both much smaller, much slimmer in declaration as well as physical size, and then it plugs into this common content and uses it. So basically you do the work once, and all the snaps that rely on that can benefit from it. Alej, do you want to add anything? Chocolate less? No? You happy? Good. Any other questions?
Question over here.
Are these extensions, are they built from the debs that make up Ubuntu proper, or are they built from source?
The extensions themselves or the snaps?
The extensions themselves, are they built from deb packages or built from source upstream code?
We build Snapcraft from our own sources, so the code is implemented in Snapcraft itself. You can go online on GitHub, check the Snapcraft tree, and see all the magic there. Any other questions? Was that a hand, Alej? Have you reconsidered your life choices? He did.
There are life choices being reconsidered.
I think you were asking about the code in the extensions. In the case for KDE Neon, at least it's coming from KDE Neon. So it's actually like the lib KDE framework core add-ons, for example, it's coming from their deb file. I don't think it's coming from, like, I don't think it's a separate build, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, so the point of my question was, I think in Flatpak they're called is a runtime. I think is similar to what an extension would be in Snap. I could be wrong on that. I think the runtimes are built from source directly, and I was just wondering if the extensions follow the same runtime way where they build from source, or is it more like you assemble all of the debs that would otherwise take to build the GNOME stack, and then if they're all sourced from the debs?
I am being prevented from answering because someone else wants to say something. Heather,
Yeah,
yes.
the answer is really both. So the really important pieces, like the stuff that we need for GTK and all of those things, all of the GTK source view and all of those things, we build those from source. That way, when we build them and when we add them into the extension, we can grab the latest version that upstream has. But then we also have some just general, like, no, I think libc we do build from source, but there's some like larger libraries there, or like it tools and like, yeah, some of those, we just grab those. If that's good enough, what's in the archive, then we'll grab the debs from the archive and kind of stage those. But if we need something newer, then we certainly build it from source. So all the major key components are built from source.
I just want to clarify something that might be implied in your question. The extensions are a pretty unique concept if you compare it to the classical desktop counterpart applications, packages, debs, and RPMs. So I can't really think of a concept that would, well, be equivalent to the extensions functionality in that sense. So what you have here is a top-level commonality on top of packaging in multiple ways. So it is built from source, but that doesn't mean that you have to code every component. You can reuse components, but you still build it yourself. You don't source the extension from a deb and transform it into a Snapcraft. Okay. So let's see what the next slide hides. It hides more questions. No more questions. Is there anything online on the stream that...
I just checked, and there's no questions online. Sorry.
Forever alone. Okay. There is a question.
More of a comment than a question.
If someone was looking to use Snapcraft and they were new, where would they find out more information? Where would they get help?
First, here's my email.
You're going to solve all their problems?
No.
Personal support right here?
Okay, so being the one who gives this talk, if you have any questions that are related to what I just shared, feel free to email me. On top of that, there are many ways you can join our community, ask questions, get involved, and so forth. You can go onto the Snapcraft forum. You can join the discourse and participate. You can email help@snapcraft.io, which will go to a team of Snapcraft experts. I guess those are the main venues. Did I miss any? No? And of course, as previously alluded, I cannot solve all your life problems, maybe just some. Okay, I'd like to thank you for your time, patience, and understanding. Hopefully this was mildly entertaining. There was no chocolate, and I apologize for that. Next time, hopefully, I'll be able to toss a bit of candy at you. Thank you, and party on.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that. Oh, there's now general questions.
So are we still live, or how's it working? Always live. Okay.
We're live. Okay. Anecdotally,
Yes.
when you look back on all the Snap work that you've done,
My work or in general?
or in general,
Okay.
what Snap do you think is either like the most technically awesome, or did you have the most fun working on as far as like deploying Snap in the state that it is today?
Okay. So it's actually two questions, right? The most awesome thing? Technically awesome. Well, it's not a developer-focusing feature. It's a user-focusing feature, and it's parallel installs. For those of you who don't know, you can install snaps, the same version or different versions of Snap in parallel. So you could install, I'll go with the VLC as example, the media player. You can install VLC 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. However many you like. Each one of those can be a different version from a different channel. So you can have VLC 3 from the stable channel, and you can have VLC 4 from the edge channel using the new interface installed in parallel. And you can even run them in parallel, with some caveats, which I'll elaborate in a sec. So you can have LibreOffice 5, 6, and 7, how many different versions we have in the store, whatever exists. Maybe we don't have 5 anymore, yeah, sorry for false hopes. But you can have 6 and 7 side by side and see how those work. You can have different versions of NPM, different versions of Java, different versions of Python. You can then have multiple development environments living in isolation from one another, use them in parallel, see the differences. If you have backward compatibility needs, older versions may solve that for you. You may have a need to actually see the breakage in compatibility because you're developing a new application with a new database or some other asset, and you want to see how it works in version A versus version B, and so forth. So this, I think, for end users and even developers themselves, is a pretty nifty feature. The caveat is that the namespace remains one. Like the movie Highlander from the 80s, there can only be one, or there can be only one, yes? If you have an application, most likely a server, that needs to bind to a port, has a socket, uses a shared memory element, then those may conflict with different versions of that application running in parallel. So only one may be able to acquire the resource, or there might be locking problems, or there might be contention accessing the resource. But if you have standalone applications that don't necessarily have to modify anything outside of their private memory space, you're golden. So that's the coolest one. The coolest thing I've been involved with, I'll have to think about and come back to you.
All right, then we got another question over here.
Yes.
Yes, this is a really nice feature, but for now, please do not try it with the cup snap. I think for now, as the cup snap is now, I never knew before that there was this feature. It will make a mess, but I will look into the cup snap perhaps later on. I succeed to make it also parallelizable as you mentioned.
Just for the sake of our online audience, that was Till, the benevolent dictator for printing, right? Yes. And he was talking about the cups interface for printing. Like I said, if you have a service, if you have a daemon, problems can arise, binding to a socket or port. So, yeah. Listen to his advice and don't run more than one cups at once. Haha. Anything else? Question on the left side?
You're really making me.
It's good for you. A
Yeah,
bit of
it's good for me.
exercise. Yes.
With extensions, is there a deduplication process? So let's say you have 4 or 5 snaps that are all relying on the same extension.
Yes.
Will there just be one copy of that extension on the system, not one for each? Okay. And then my other question is, we've been hearing a lot about cold boots versus warm boots with things like the Firefox snap that is recently launched. And part of my understanding of that is that loading all of those extensions libraries into memory basically from nil can take a little bit of time, hence a little bit of latency with the launching of Firefox. If you have an app already launched that makes use of an extension, and then you, let's say, launch Firefox, and it also uses that, will it boot up faster because it is using the extension that is already basically in memory from the other snap?
It is not a trivial question because it really depends what we're talking about. Are we talking about content that it lives in a content snap, or are we talking about libraries that are part of the snap itself? It's not a trivial one. In general, memory management and it's a dark art in Linux. No, seriously. But I actually wanna well, mostly for the online audience, you should go onto snapcraft.io. There's a range of about half a dozen different articles that discuss the startup performance, hot and cold, that discuss the improvements that went into this, problems that existed in previous versions, as well as, 1 second, I'm getting photographed, so I need to look serious. just go on, yeah. And the use of compression algorithms for the Squash FS file system for the snaps, and how that affects the startup times. So there's quite a bit of journey and quite a bit of context that people should take into account when they look at this before assessing any more recent things, and then thinking about what's going to happen further down the road. I hope I gave a clear enough answer. It wasn't too political.
All right, I see a question way in the back.
Far in.
Can I consider the extensions as a collection of the packages?
Well, in a way, yes. It's a bit more than that. It's a packaging of common components, as well as a declaration of repeatable tasks. It doesn't necessarily have to be a package, but more as a logic of that package, in that sense, if you understand what I mean. For instance, right, plugging a hole to the security confinement to access the home and network interfaces. You're not really using a package per se, but you're doing a task. So it's like having a script that does a lot of good things for you, if you want to look at it if you need an analogy, right?
Thank you. Another question.
Yes.
What's the advantage of the snap comparing to the Flatpak?
Okay. So the question I will not be answering today because it's not fair. Debating your, let's call them competitors, while holding a microphone is not a noble thing to do. What I always like to say is, I think that you should use the best technology for the job. You analyze it in a cool, objective manner, and then you realize, okay, I need these features, and here's the technology that satisfies most, all, or none of it. And if it has a name that starts with S, use it. If it starts with F, use it. Or maybe you have a mix of needs, and in certain situations, Snap will do better and Flatpak will do better. So that's as best that I can answer here.
Thank you.
I think there's one more question.
There's one more question.
Yes, I have one suggestion. Perhaps one could, while the system is booted, already load some common extensions, for example, the GNOME extension, or even one could log what the user has used, and when he boots the next time, based on that, already load the extensions which he probably would need most, and so when he logs in, the extension is already there, and when he clicks on Firefox, then Firefox comes up quickly.
So I think the one problem with, it's not really a problem, but the moral question is, what can you do for the user without compromising their privacy, without overdumbing the system, and overcomplicating your own infrastructure? Because any scenario where you try to solve things in a deterministic machine way means you have two ways of going about it. Either you succeed or you have a bug. And if a path from application code to the usage has 5 steps or 29 steps, it's going to be a completely different journey. So yes, you can preload things, but what does that mean? Does it mean that if you have an application with a security problem, you preload it and now you have a vulnerable application running before the user had a chance to update it? And that application then gets updated while the user is using it. What happens at that point? And so it's just a trivial example, but multiplied by 1,000 to understand how many different permutations there are. None of this can be solved quickly. If it could have been, it wouldn't be a problem, right? So, but an open invitation to everyone. If you have suggestions, ideas, or even pure objections to how things are being done, please join the forum, express yourselves. And this is not just an empty cliche sentence. We do actually read. My job is to listen to you and go back and talk to my peers about your problems, about the community issues, technological obstacles, anything that could make snaps, well, that could improve the ecosystem. Simple as that. Was there any other questions? I think I saw another hand. No? That was just me being hopeful.
Applause.
You can. Thank you.